The speech I'm about to give is one with some variation I've given many times. Indeed, in these times, it is the only speech I give. I keep giving it because no one seems to be listening. My thesis could be wrong, but I persist because I've not heard a convincing rebuttal. So I shall try once again. The number one problem in America is not the deficit, it's not open borders, it's not even China. The biggest problem would not be in the top 100 priorities for any Republican politician, or for that matter, anyone in this auditorium. So what is this problem that is greater than all the others and so vastly underappreciated? White guilt. America is being gobbled up by an emerging totalitarianism that runs on white guilt. Totalitarianisms require an ideology. The ideology of our enemy is wokeism. The central idea of wokeism is group outcome equality, which is irreconcilable with the American understanding of justice that is based on individual merit. In order to destroy America and bring about a society based on group outcome equality, the enemy must convince us that everything about America is and always will be racist, systemically racist, as they say. And this, in turn, requires that the enemy bludgeon us with our guilt every chance it gets. Our guilt, of course, is primarily the result of slavery. Virtually nothing good came out of slavery. It was horrendous, against everything we stand for. That there were mitigating circumstances is true, and at another time these are worth addressing. But they do not make the grievous wrongs committed against blacks any less grievous. But we must not let the sin of slavery or myriad other sins cripple us. Consider our brutal treatment of Native Americans. This was a sin, not as sinful as slavery, but a very serious sin nonetheless. We acknowledge this sin, but generally we do not allow it to paralyze us. We must do the same with slavery. Acknowledge it forthrightly, but not allow it to paralyze us. If we do, we shall decapitate wokeism. If we don't, we die. Every few years, a George Floyd-type incident attracts national attention. In the Floyd case, as with all others, most of the elite, many conservatives too, confessed their guilt and announced in the most solemn of tones that at long last we need an honest reckoning with our racist past. And this time, we really mean it. Enough already. America must stop taking the race bait. The radical wing of the Democrat Party, what I call the destructive left, never misses an opportunity to tell us how guilty we are. They tell us we are systemically racist, that white supremacy is America's #1 threat, and that all whites, no matter how deprived, have white privilege. They tell us racism has never been worse, and opportunities for blacks never fewer. By systemic racism, the destructive left means that racism has insinuated itself into every nook and cranny of American life. From the idea of a transcendent moral order to equal opportunity, free speech, merit, assimilation, colorblindness, religion, charter schools, Rotary clubs, guns, equal opportunity, capitalism, religion, manliness, the Emancipation Proclamation, due process, separation of church and state. And I'm running out of breath, but they tell us that these and many others are all racist, all of it. I have troubled my listeners with a great number of examples because sometimes the forest comes into view by studying the trees. Destroy these attributes of America, and she is no longer America. But these attributes, as most Americans know, are in fact what has made her the freest and most prosperous country in the history of the world. With Trump's accession to his second presidency, many conservatives believe that the revolutionary movement that once threatened to overturn the American way of life is now in retreat, and that any talk about the dangers of totalitarianism is now overwrought. I don't agree. The problem that confronts us is not a political problem, but a cultural one. A college professor or newspaper reporter doesn't become less philosophically woke just because his institution no longer has an official DEI department. Nor is the problem of white guilt a legal one. Last year's Supreme Court decisions putatively outlawed race quotas at colleges and universities, but already quotas are back to the levels that obtained before the decision. Take Harvard. Were Harvard to admit students based solely on merit, the student body would be less than 1% Black. Although the average American could care less about what goes on at Harvard, the elite does care. The elite will not abide only 1% at Harvard. Because of guilt, liberals embrace quotas, while conservatives do not seriously oppose them. Instead of teaching our children that America is systemically racist, as does the 1619 Project, we should be teaching them to revere their country without dismissing her sins. Daniel Patrick Moynihan got the balance just right. Am I embarrassed to speak for a less than perfect democracy, he asked? Not one bit. Find me a better one. Do I suppose there are societies which are free of sin? No, I don't. Do I think ours is on balance incomparably the most hopeful set of human relations the world has ever seen? Yes, I do. This is pitch perfect. It acknowledges America's shortcomings without shortchanging its greatness. One day we shall have to ask our young men to die for their country, perhaps to fight China. We shall ask them to follow their forebears who died under a hail of bullets while crossing exposed beaches at Normandy. How can we possibly expect our children to die for the evil country that the 1619 Project describes? We won't defend ourselves against China or anyone else unless we feel we are worthy of defending. We don't see the danger of white guilt because we don't see clearly the enemy regime itself. This is because, first, the structure of our emerging totalitarian regime is somewhat novel. The enemy consists not just of the government, but also of the nation's major cultural and business institutions. Although the structure is different from its 20th century counterparts, its intent and means of operation are similar. The 2020 riots were a good example of the enemy regime in action. Leftist agitators sparked the flame that lit the riots. The party's intellectuals justified them. Foundations and big business, in particular particular tech plutocrats, gave Black Lives Matter Network billions. Curators of media and entertainment, including sports teams, shaped public opinion. Administrators of justice bailed out rioters, and Democrat leaders from Joe Biden down fanned the flames. Nor do we see that the policies of the enemy regime are more than just a bunch of individual, stupid, and evil things. They are a coordinated bunch of stupid and evil things. They all serve the same end, the destruction of America, and are justified by the same thing, systemic racism. Take open borders. Yes, they are dangerous insofar as they import criminals and drugs, but these alone won't destroy America. What will destroy America are millions of immigrants who don't wish to be, or in some cases can't be, easily assimilated. Moreover, we make no effort to assimilate them. That, according to the destructive left, would be racist. Mass deportations are fine as far as they go, but we won't permanently solve our open border problem until we shed our guilt. This is true of climate alarmism, racial quotas, propaganda, censorship, and the rest of the woke agenda. They are all intended to destroy America. Even if you doubt their intent, it will be their consequence. Because we don't see clearly the enemy regime we faced, we entirely missed the most important event of the 2024 election. We had a traitor as the vice presidential candidate for one of our two major political parties, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. What else to call a man who wants to teach our children that America is so evil it must be overthrown? This is what ethnic studies teaches. Walz's administration will teach ethnic studies, which is very close to critical race theory, in every grade, in every course, in every public school in Minnesota. I'm going to abbreviate the elaboration of this, but only note that Walz's lead economic education advisor is a man named Brian Luzinski, who is on tape, which we couldn't show here today, saying the first tenet of critical race theory is that the United States, as constructed, is irreversibly racist. So if the nation state, as constructed, is irreversibly racist, then it must be done with. It must be overthrown. This is the leading education advisor for a former vice presidential candidate. Imagine that in the 50s, Adlai Stevenson's vice presidential candidate, it was revealed that he was a communist. Well, Stevenson's campaign would have ground to a halt in 5 minutes. But since we're not aware of the danger we face, Walz went largely unnoticed. And I think this is as good example of anything of the extent to which the enemy regime has secreted itself in the highest levels of government. In order to convince Americans that they are irredeemably guilty of racism, The enemy must ensure that everything the public reads, watches, and experiences conforms to this narrative. And it must make us incessantly chant, diversity is our greatest strength. The more diversity, the better, says the party line. So, for example, the destructive left claims that having more women in combat makes our fighting forces more lethal. It also claims that we would get better airline pilots or surgeons if we hired based on quotas. When we've reached this point, there is almost no assault on common sense that cannot be justified. What is the solution? Yes, there are policies to institute, long-term moratorium on immigration, the destruction of the race-based 1619 curricula would be, a good place to start. But the solution is, I think, primarily rhetorical. Trump and leading Republicans must speak out forcefully and repeatedly. They must point out the enemy regime, explain how it works, and why it is so dangerous. Most importantly, they must explain that white guilt is the engine that drives the enemy regime, and why, therefore, it is so necessary that we should shed ourselves of guilt. Many Americans voted for President Trump in 2016 because he told them what they knew but needed to hear. America could be great again. Now Trump must tell them something else they know but need to hear. America is no longer guilty of systemic racism, or most any racism for that matter. The 250th anniversary of America is approaching. There will be much celebration, as there should be. But at the same time, we must mind the warning of our founders, who understood, as did Ronald Reagan, that freedom is only one generation away from extinction. In order to preserve our freedom, we must shed our guilt. Thank you very much.